The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds as Tanya checked her to-do list one final time. Today marked 10 years since she and David had exchanged vows in that little chapel by the lake. 10 years of building a life together, navigating the highs and lows that came with any marriage. Tanya had spent weeks planning their anniversary celebration, determined to make it special despite their recent arguments about money and work hours. "Did you call the bakery to confirm our pickup time?" David called from the bedroom where he was buttoning up his dress shirt. "Already did," Tanya replied, tucking her phone into her purse. "They said the cake will be ready at noon." She smiled to herself, picturing David's reaction when he saw the custom 3-tier anniversary cake she'd ordered. It featured elements from their wedding day and symbols of memorable moments they'd shared over the decade. David appeared in the doorway, adjusting his cuffs. At 42, he still had the same warm brown eyes that had caught Tanya's attention when they first met, though new lines around them told stories of long nights at the office. His accounting firm had been demanding more hours lately, and the stress showed in the tightness of his shoulders. "I need to stop by the office this morning, but I'll meet you at the bakery," he said, grabbing his car keys. Tanya frowned. "Today? But it's Saturday and we agreed to spend the whole day together." I know. Just 1 hour to finish the Henderson account. I promise I'll be there by noon." He kissed her cheek quickly before heading out the door, leaving Tanya staring after him with a familiar disappointment settling in her chest. The expensive bakery downtown was buzzing with weekend customers when Tanya arrived. She joined the line, checking her watch repeatedly. It was already 12:10, and David hadn't texted to say he was running late. Again. When her turn came, she approached the counter with a smile. "Hi, I'm here to pick up a special order cake. Last name Wilson." The young man behind the counter tapped at his computer screen. "Wilson. 3-tier anniversary design, correct? That'll be $285, Tanya blinked. "I already put down a $100 deposit when I ordered it." The clerk checked his screen again and shook his head. "I'm not seeing any deposit in the system. The total is $285. "There must be a mistake," Tanya insisted, pulling out her phone to find the receipt. "I spoke with Leah when I ordered, and she took my card information for the deposit." "Leah's not here today, but I can call the manager if you'd like," the clerk offered, his friendly demeanor cooling slightly as the line behind Tanya grew. Just then, David hurried through the door, his tie slightly askew. He made his way to Tanya's side. "Sorry I'm late. The meeting ran longer than expected." Tanya gave him a tight smile before turning back to the clerk. "Yes, please call the manager. There's been a misunderstanding about the payment." As they waited, David checked his watch impatiently. "What's the problem?" "They're saying I didn't pay the deposit, but I know I did. I have the confirmation email somewhere." Tanya scrolled through her phone, growing increasingly frustrated as she couldn't find the email. The manager, a brisk woman with graying hair pulled into a severe bun, emerged from the back. "I'm Ms. Rivera. How can I help?" Tanya explained the situation while the line of customers behind them fidgeted and whispered. "Let me check our records," Ms. Rivera said, typing rapidly. After a moment, she looked up. "I see the order was placed, but there's no record of any deposit payment. Our system automatically sends confirmation emails for deposits." "I know I paid it," Tanya insisted, feeling her face grow warm as people behind her began to mutter about the delay. David sighed loudly. "How much is it?" "I'll just pay the whole thing so we can go." $285, the manager replied. David's eyebrows shot up. "Almost $300? For a cake?" He turned to Tanya. "You spent that much on a cake without discussing it with me." Tanya felt a flash of anger. "I did discuss it with you. 3 weeks ago, when we were planning the anniversary celebration. You said, and I quote, 'Get whatever you want.' I didn't think whatever you want would cost as much as our car payment." David's voice rose slightly, causing nearby customers to turn and stare. "It's a special occasion," Tanya said, trying to keep her voice level. "It's not like I buy expensive cakes every day." The manager cleared her throat. "Perhaps you'd like to step aside to discuss this while I help the next customer." "No, we'll take the cake," David said abruptly, pulling out his wallet. He counted out $300 bills. "Keep the change," he muttered, not meeting anyone's eyes. The manager signaled to a worker, who disappeared into the back room and returned with a large white box. "Congratulations on your anniversary," she said with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. The drive home was silent. Tanya stared out the window, clutching the cake box on her lap. David gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched. "I did make that deposit," Tanya said finally as they pulled into their driveway. "I wouldn't forget something like that." David cut the engine. "Maybe you thought you did. Or maybe they made a mistake. Either way, it doesn't matter now." "It does matter," Tanya insisted, following him into the house with the cake box. "It's not about the money. It's about you not believing me." "What I don't believe," David said as he loosened his tie, "is that you thought it was reasonable to spend that much on a cake when we're trying to save for a down payment on a new house." Tanya carefully placed the cake box on the kitchen counter. "It's our 10th anniversary, David, 10 years. That's worth celebrating properly. And that's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps us living paycheck to paycheck." David's voice rose again. "You always do this, spend money on things we don't need because of some special occasion." "So our anniversary isn't important?" Tanya asked, hurt blooming in her chest. "Of course it's important," David said, running a hand through his hair. "But so is our future. So is being financially responsible. One special cake isn't going to bankrupt us," Tanya argued. She opened the cake box to show him. "Look at it, at least. They recreated our wedding cake topper and added all those little details I told you about. The Eiffel Tower from our 5th anniversary trip. The little dog that looks like Max." But David wasn't looking at the cake. He was looking at his phone. The bank just sent a notification. The deposit to the bakery just went through. Today. 3 weeks late. Tanya stared at him. "What?" "The payment you made 3 weeks ago just processed today. That's why they didn't have a record of it." He showed her the screen. That's not possible," Tanya said, confused. "Why would it take 3 weeks to process?" David scrolled through his banking app. "Looks like you used our old joint account, the one we've been meaning to close. It's been having those processing issues, remember? The bank said some transactions might be delayed." The realization washed over Tanya. She had used the wrong card. The embarrassment at the bakery, the argument. All of it could have been avoided if she'd double-checked which card she was using. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't realize I used the wrong account." David's expression softened slightly, but the tension didn't leave his shoulders. "So we paid twice for an overpriced cake. Perfect." Tanya placed the cake in the refrigerator and leaned against the counter, taking deep breaths to calm herself. Through the kitchen window, she could see the backyard decorations she'd put up that morning. String lights hanging from the patio cover and a banner that read, "Happy 10th Anniversary," swaying gently in the breeze. Their closest friends and family would arrive in less than 2 hours for the surprise party she had planned. A party that now felt like a terrible idea. The sound of the shower running upstairs gave her time to collect her thoughts. She and David had been arguing more frequently over the past year. Small disagreements about money, household chores, and work hours had grown into deeper conflicts that left them both frustrated and distant. The cake incident was just the latest in a series of misunderstandings that seemed to push them further apart. Tanya picked up her phone and called her best friend, Lily. "Hey, everything ready for the party?" Lily answered cheerfully. "I'm thinking about canceling," Tanya replied, her voice low. "What? Why? You've been planning this for weeks," Tanya sighed. "David and I just had another fight. About the cake, of all things. I don't think either of us is in a party mood." "Listen," Lily said firmly, "every couple fights, especially ones that have been together for 10 years. Don't cancel the celebration you've worked so hard on because you're having a rough day. I don't know. I do. We'll be there at 4, as planned. Talk to David. Smooth things over. This is your anniversary. Don't let a bad moment ruin the whole day." After hanging up, Tanya headed upstairs. The bathroom door was open, steam billowing out. David stood at the sink, a towel wrapped around his waist, shaving. "Can we talk?" Tanya asked, leaning against the doorframe. David met her eyes in the mirror. "About what?" "About earlier. About us." She stepped into the bathroom, sitting on the edge of the bathtub. "I'm sorry about the cake confusion, but I feel like we're not just arguing about cakes and money anymore. Something bigger is wrong." David rinsed his razor, his shoulders tense. "Nothing's wrong except that we're spending more than we're making. I'm tired of worrying about bills every month while you act like money grows on trees." "That's not fair," Tanya said, hurt flashing in her eyes. "I work just as hard as you do, and I manage most of our household budget. One expensive cake doesn't make me financially irresponsible. It's not just the cake." David turned to face her. It's the new clothes you didn't need. The fancy dinner last month, the weekend trip to the beach. It all adds up, Tanya. Those weren't just random expenses. The clothes were for my job interviews. The dinner was to celebrate your promotion. The beach trip was because we both needed a break after working 60-hour weeks. Tanya stood up, frustration building. And by the way, I got the job at Palmer Marketing. I was going to tell you tonight at the party. David paused. What party? Tanya closed her eyes briefly. I planned a surprise anniversary party. Our friends and family are coming over at 4. Today? Without asking me? David threw his hands up. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You make these decisions without considering what I want. It's a surprise party, David. That's how they work. Tanya's voice grew louder. And maybe if you weren't constantly at the office or checking your work emails at home, we could actually talk about these things. I'm working all those hours to support us. To build a future we never get to enjoy because you're always working. Tanya shot back. What's the point of saving for tomorrow if we're miserable today? David turned back to the mirror, gripping the edges of the sink. I can't do this right now. I have 20 people coming to a party I didn't even know about. And I'm supposed to act happy about our marriage when we can't even agree on basic priorities. Our marriage isn't the problem, Tanya said, voice shaking slightly. It's your refusal to see any perspective but your own. My perspective. David turned, eyes flashing. My perspective is that I'm trying to be responsible while you're living in a fantasy world where money problems get solved by ignoring them. That's not true, and you know it. Tanya stood her ground. I've supported us many times when your work was slow. I've cut back on expenses when we needed to. But I also believe in celebrating important moments and investing in experiences that matter. Well, your important moments are putting us in debt. David pushed past her into the bedroom and yanked open a dresser drawer. You know what? Have your party. Pretend everything is perfect. I'll play along like I always do. Tanya followed him. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm tired of being the bad guy because I worry about our finances. It means I'm tired of coming home to find out you've made plans or spent money without considering me. David pulled on a t-shirt with jerky movements. It means sometimes I feel like I'm just the wallet in this relationship, not a partner. The accusation stung like a slap. Tanya stepped back, tears welling in her eyes. How can you say that? After everything we've been through together? After all the times I've supported your dreams, your career changes, your long hours? Look, I didn't mean... No, I think you did mean it. Tanya's voice was quiet now, which somehow felt more serious than when she'd been shouting. I think you've been feeling this way for a while and just never said it. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Downstairs, the doorbell rang. Tanya glanced at the clock. It was only 3:30, someone was early. I need to get that, she said, wiping quickly at her eyes. We'll finish this later. Downstairs, she opened the door to find Lily and her husband, Pete, holding gift bags. We came early to help set up, Lily explained, then frowned as she took in Tanya's red eyes. Are you okay? Fine, Tanya said, forcing a smile. Just some anniversary emotions. Come in. For the next half hour, Tanya directed her friends in setting up additional decorations and arranging the food she'd prepared earlier. David came downstairs eventually, dressed and outwardly calm, though Tanya could see the tension in his jaw as he greeted Lily and Pete with a stiff smile. More guests began to arrive. Tanya slipped into hostess mode, greeting everyone warmly, accepting gifts and congratulations with practiced grace. David moved through the gathering separately, making small talk and keeping his distance from her. The party swirled around them, a cheerful bubble that seemed disconnected from the real emotion simmering beneath the surface. When it was time for cake, Tanya went to the kitchen to retrieve it. David followed her, closing the door behind them. Everyone's waiting, he said, his voice low. I know. Tanya opened the refrigerator and carefully removed the cake box. Can we just get through this evening? For our guests' sake. Sure, like you said, we're good at pretending. There was an edge to his voice that made Tanya look up sharply. What does that mean? It means this whole party is a perfect example of our problems. All these people think we're celebrating 10 happy years while we're actually fighting in the kitchen. He laughed without humor. It's all for show. That's not true, Tanya insisted, setting the cake on the counter. Yes, We're going through a rough patch, but that doesn't erase 10 years of building a life together. The good parts are real too, David, are they? Because lately, it feels like we're just going through the motions. Different priorities, different goals. He ran a hand through his hair. Maybe we've grown too far apart. The words hung in the air between them. Outside the kitchen, they could hear laughter and conversation, oblivious to the painful moment unfolding just feet away. "You don't mean that," Tanya whispered, her hands trembling as she tried to open the cake box. "I don't know what I mean anymore." David moved closer, reaching for the box. "Here, let me help." "I've got it," Tanya said, pulling the box away instinctively. In the struggle, the corner of the box caught on a cabinet handle and tore. The cake tilted precariously, then tumbled from the box. David lunged to catch it, but instead sent it flying across the kitchen. The beautiful three-tier creation hit the wall with a dull thud, then slid to the floor in a mess of frosting and cake. They both stood frozen, staring at the destroyed anniversary cake. In the silence, someone knocked on the kitchen door. "Everything okay in there?" Lily called. "Everyone's waiting for the cake cutting." Tanya stared at the mess of cake and frosting sliding down their kitchen wall. The beautiful anniversary cake she'd specially ordered, the one they'd argued about, paid for twice, and nearly ruined their day over, was now nothing more than a colorful splatter across their kitchen. 10 sugar roses crushed, the tiny fondant Eiffel Tower broken in half, the carefully piped message "Happy 10th Anniversary" smeared into an unreadable smudge on their beige wall. David's face had gone pale. "Tanya, He started, but the words died in his throat as he looked from the ruined cake to his wife, clearly bracing himself for the explosion that was sure to follow. Outside the kitchen, their friend Lily knocked again. "Guys, everyone's waiting." Tanya felt something shift inside her as she looked at the absurdity of the situation. After all the fighting, all the tension, all the carefully laid plans, this was how their 10th anniversary would be remembered. With cake on the wall. And suddenly, unexpectedly, a small bubble of laughter escaped her lips. David blinked at her in confusion. "Are you laughing?" Tanya couldn't help herself. The laughter grew, spilling out of her in waves that shook her shoulders and brought tears to her eyes. She gestured helplessly at the cake disaster, unable to form words. David stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Tanya, I'm so sorry. I was just trying to help and I know," she managed between fits of laughter. "I know you were." She walked over to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a spoon. Still smiling, she approached the wall and carefully scooped a small bit of cake and frosting from where it had landed. With all the dignity she could muster, she tasted it. She said thoughtfully. "You know, it actually is delicious. Shame we're eating it off the wall instead of on fancy plates." David stood frozen, clearly waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the laughter to turn to tears or rage. When it didn't, a small, uncertain smile began to form on his lips. "Are you serious right now? You're not mad?" Tanya looked at him, at the genuine bewilderment in his eyes, and felt a wave of something like clarity wash over her. What would be the point? Would getting angry fix the cake? Would it make our guests happier? Would it solve any of the real problems we've been having? She took another small scoop of wall cake and held it out to him. "Try it. After all, we paid for it, twice." Hesitantly, David took the spoon and tasted the cake. "It is good," he admitted. Then slowly he began to laugh too, softly at first. Then with growing abandon until they were both standing in their kitchen, surrounded by cake wreckage, laughing like they hadn't in months. The kitchen door swung open and Lily stood there, taking in the scene with wide eyes, the cake smashed against the wall. Tanya and David laughing hysterically, spoons in hand. "What on earth happened?" she gasped. Tanya tried to compose herself. "We had a cake mishap." Lily looked from the wall to them and back again. "I can see that. But why are you both laughing? And why are you eating it off the wall?" "Because," David said, surprising both women with the warmth in his voice, "my wife is the most unpredictable person I've ever met. Just when I think I know exactly how she'll react, she does something completely different." Their eyes met across the kitchen, and for the first time that day, maybe for the first time in months, they really saw each other. "The cake is ruined," Tanya told Lily. "Can you let everyone know we'll be out in a minute? Maybe open that bottle of champagne in the fridge." When Lily left, shaking her head in confusion, David and Tanya stood in silence for a moment. The laughter had subsided, leaving something new and fragile in its wake. I thought you'd be furious, David said quietly. I probably should be, Tanya admitted. A week ago, even yesterday, I might have been. But standing here looking at cake on our wall after everything that's happened today, I just couldn't find the anger. It all suddenly seemed so small. David moved closer to her. The cake? Or our fight? Both, neither. Tanya sighed. I don't know. It just hit me that we've spent the whole day fighting about a cake, about money, about a surprise party, when what we should be focusing on is us. 10 years, David. 10 years of building a life together, and we're letting it crumble over things that won't matter a month from now, let alone years. David leaned against the counter. I've been so caught up in securing our future that I've been missing our present, and I've been so focused on making moments special that I haven't been thinking enough about the day-to-day reality of our finances. Tanya acknowledged. We're quite a pair, aren't we? David's voice was gentle. Both trying to do what we think is best for us, but in completely opposite ways. Tanya nodded. Maybe that's the problem. We stopped being a team. Started keeping score. You spend too much. I work too much. Your priorities are wrong. My priorities are wrong. When did we become opponents instead of partners? David asked, the question hanging in the air between them. Before Tanya could answer, the kitchen door swung open again. This time it was Pete, Lily's husband, carrying a small grocery store cake with a single candle stuck in the center. Lily told us about the cake disaster, he said with a grin. Lucky for you, I always keep an emergency cake in my car for just such occasions. Tanya raised an eyebrow. You keep emergency cake in your car? Doesn't everyone? Pete winked. Actually, we stopped and grabbed it when Lily forgot the gift at home. Figured it might come in handy as an extra dessert. Never imagined it would be the main event. David took the simple chocolate cake from Pete. It's perfect. Thank you. When Pete left, David looked at Tanya. Ready to face our guests? Almost. She grabbed a dish towel and quickly wiped a smear of frosting from his cheek. The simple gesture felt strangely intimate after the distance that had been between them all day. Now you're ready. They carried the substitute cake into the living room where their friends and family had gathered. A cheer went up when they appeared. Sorry for the delay, David announced. We had a slight disagreement with the original cake, but thanks to Pete's emergency cake preparedness, we can still have a proper celebration. As they placed the cake on the coffee table, Tanya noticed David's hand on the small of her back, a familiar touch that had been absent in recent weeks. She leaned into it slightly, acknowledging the reconnection. Someone handed them a knife, and together they cut the simple store-bought cake, while their guests snapped photos and applauded. Speech, called Lily's father from the back of the room. David looked at Tanya, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, and he cleared his throat. 10 years ago, he began, his voice steady, I married my best friend. We promised to love each other through good times and bad, through richer and poorer. He paused, meeting Tanya's eyes. We've had some of each, and I'm sure we'll have more of both ahead of us. But standing here today, I'm reminded that what matters most isn't the fancy cake, which, trust me, you don't want to see right now, or the perfect party, or even having all our finances in perfect order. He took Tanya's hand. What matters is that when everything falls apart, literally in the case of our original cake, we can still find reasons to laugh together. We can still choose each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Tanya squeezed his hand, fighting back tears that were very different from the ones she'd shed earlier. What my husband is trying to say, she added, looking around at their guests, is that marriage isn't about perfect moments. It's about finding perfection in the imperfect ones. As their friends raised glasses in a toast, David leaned close to Tanya's ear. I'm sorry about earlier. All of it. Me too, she whispered back. Maybe later, when everyone's gone, we can talk? Really talk? He nodded, his eyes serious. I'd like that. For the rest of the evening, they moved through the party together rather than apart. The tension hadn't magically disappeared, and Tanya knew they still had difficult conversations ahead. But something fundamental had shifted when she'd chosen laughter over anger, when they'd both chosen to see the absurdity of fighting over cake on their anniversary. The last guest left just after 11. Tanya closed the front door, leaning against it with a sigh of relief. Despite the cake disaster, the party had turned into a pleasant evening. Friends had shared stories about them as a couple, some embarrassing, others touching. Tanya's parents had brought a photo album none of them had seen in years. David's college roommate had reminded everyone about the time David had driven 8 hours just to surprise Tanya for her birthday during their first year of dating. "I'd forgotten about that," David said now, collecting empty glasses from the coffee table. "That surprise actually worked, unlike the one you planned today." Tanya smiled, hearing the gentle teasing in his voice rather than criticism. "I think today's surprise worked out exactly as it needed to, just not as I planned." They worked in companionable silence for a while, clearing plates, folding chairs, and returning the living room to its normal state. The tension from earlier hadn't completely disappeared, but it had transformed into something more thoughtful, less raw. When they reached the kitchen, the cake mess on the wall greeted them, now dried and crusty, a bizarre decoration that somehow seemed like perfect evidence of their day. "We should clean that up," Tanya said, though she made no immediate move toward the paper towels. "In a minute," David replied. He pulled out 2 kitchen chairs. "I think we promised each other a talk first." Tanya nodded, suddenly nervous. During the party, with friends and family around, it had been easier to set their problems aside. Now, alone in their quiet house, the weight of what they needed to discuss settled between them. She sat across from him at the small kitchen table where they'd shared thousands of meals over the years. Morning coffees, rushed breakfast, late-night ice cream. This table had witnessed their lives merging into one shared story, day by day. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "Maybe with the job you mentioned, the one at Palmer Marketing?" David suggested. "You never told me you were interviewing there." Tanya fidgeted with a napkin left on the table. "I didn't want to jinx it, and honestly, I wasn't sure you'd be supportive." "Why wouldn't I support you changing jobs?" "Because it pays a little less than my current position. But it's fewer hours, more creative work, and a much shorter commute." She looked up at him. "I knew you'd focus on the money part." David was quiet for a moment. "You're right. I probably would have." He ran a hand through his hair. "When did I become so rigid about money? So focused on the bottom line that I stopped considering what makes you happy?" "It wasn't sudden," Tanya said gently. "Remember 3 years ago when your firm lost those big clients? We were really stretched financially for months. 7 months and 12 days, David said with a small smile. "I counted every one of them, waking up at 3 a.m., wondering if we'd make the mortgage payment, hoping clients would pay their invoices on time." "You carried a lot of that worry alone," Tanya acknowledged. "Even though I told you we were in it together, I wanted to protect you from it. I didn't need protection. I needed partnership." Tanya reached across the table and took his hand. "Somewhere along the way, you decided that financial security was your responsibility alone, and that it mattered more than anything else." David nodded slowly. "And you decided that I was too focused on money to understand why other things mattered too. So instead of talking, we just stopped sharing parts of our lives," Tanya continued. "I didn't tell you about job interviews. You didn't tell me how worried you still are about money, even though we've been fine for years now." "I'm not just worried about money," David admitted, his voice lower now. "I'm worried about failing you, about not being enough." He stared at their joined hands. "My dad could never keep a steady job. We moved 6 times before I finished high school, always one step ahead of overdue rent. I promised myself I'd never put my family through that." "David," Tanya said softly, "we're not one emergency away from eviction. We have savings. We have each other. Being careful with money is good, but living in constant fear isn't. I know that. Logically, I know that." He looked up at her. "But then you spend $300 on a cake. And all I can think is that's half a car payment or part of a mortgage payment. Or a meaningful way to celebrate 10 years of marriage," Tanya finished for him. "I understand being responsible. What I don't understand is why we can't occasionally splurge on things that matter to us." "I guess I've lost perspective on what actually matters," David admitted. They sat quietly for a moment. Through the window, they could see the patio lights still twinkling in the backyard, casting a gentle glow over their small garden. "Your turn," David finally said. "What have you been keeping from me?" Tanya took a deep breath. "I've been unhappy at work for a long time. More than unhappy, miserable. My boss takes credit for my ideas. The hours are awful. The commute is worse. Why didn't you say something?" "Because you're always talking about saving for the future, for a bigger house, for retirement. It didn't seem fair to complain about a job that pays well." She looked away. And maybe I was afraid you'd think less of me for wanting something different, something that fits my life better even if it pays less. David squeezed her hand. Tanya, I would never want you to stay in a job that makes you unhappy. Money isn't worth that kind of sacrifice. She raised an eyebrow. Says the man who works 60-hour weeks and checks his email at midnight. Touché. David smiled ruefully. Maybe we're both sacrificing too much of our present for a future we're not even enjoying the path toward. That's exactly what I've been thinking. Tanya's voice grew more animated. We keep saying we're working toward something better, but when do we get to actually live? When do we get to enjoy what we've built together? I don't want to wait until retirement to be happy, David agreed. But I also understand we need balance, Tanya added quickly. We can't just spend whatever we want with no plan for the future. David nodded. And I need to understand that some expenses aren't just money down the drain. They're investments in our happiness, in memories, in our relationship. They looked at each other across the table, the weight of recognition settling between them. For years they'd been having variations of the same argument, talking past each other rather than finding middle ground. So where do we go from here? Tanya asked. I think we start by being honest. No more hiding job interviews or financial worries. No more assuming the other person won't understand. David stood up and walked to the refrigerator. He pulled out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses from the cabinet. And maybe we celebrate properly. Without cake on the wall. Tanya laughed as he poured the wine. I don't know. That wall cake is starting to grow on me. Maybe we should keep it as a reminder. David handed her a glass and clinked his against it. A reminder of what? That sometimes the best moments come from the biggest disasters. That we're stronger together than apart. That cake tastes good even when it's served on drywall. They both laughed, and something that had been knotted tight in Tanya's chest for months began to loosen. They weren't fixed, not by a long shot, but they were talking. Really talking, in a way they hadn't in too long. To 10 years, David said, raising his glass, and to figuring out how to make the next 10 even better. I'll drink to that, Tanya replied. They took their wine to the living room and settled on the couch, closer than they'd sat in weeks. David put his arm around her shoulders and she leaned into him, familiar and right. You know what I realized today? David said after a while. When I saw that cake hit the wall, my first thought wasn't about the wasted money. It was that I'd ruined something important to you and I couldn't bear to see your face when it happened. And then I laughed instead of crying, Tanya said. Exactly. You constantly surprise me even after all these years. He kissed the top of her head. That's a gift, you know? Being with someone who can still surprise you after a decade together. Tanya thought about that. Maybe that's part of what we've been missing. The surprise. The discovery. We've been so caught up in routines and responsibilities that we stopped seeing each other clearly. So what surprises don't I know about my wife? David asked, a playful note entering his voice. Tanya smiled against his shoulder. Well, I've been taking photography classes on Wednesday nights. I thought that was your book club. That's Mondays. Wednesdays are photography. I'm actually getting pretty good. She hesitated. I've been thinking about trying to sell some of my work. Just on the side, nothing that would interfere with the new job. David was quiet for a moment. I'd like to see your photos. Really? Really? In fact, I want to see everything I've been missing while I've been buried in spreadsheets and client meetings. He shifted to look at her. I want us to start paying attention to each other again. Not just as bill payers or anniversary celebrators, but as people who are still growing and changing. Tanya felt tears prick at her eyes, but these weren't the frustrated tears from earlier in the day. These came from somewhere deeper, a place of recognition and hope. I'd like that, she whispered.